Okay, so judging by the pages in the index, this is going to be a fairly long chapter, 46 pages. The next one will be another fairly long chapter, 40 something pages. So these are going to be stretched out for me. Hopefully I can get these recorded today. We'll see what happens next. Get down, girl. Alright. Next up, Jin's entry, 13th of June, year 22. Says, after returning from the sea, we went back to our solitary lives. As if we'd made a rule, no one called each other. We just vaguely assumed how the others were doing based on the graffiti we saw on the streets. The bright light of the gas station and the piano sounds coming from the dilapidated building. The lodging on the beach was empty when I came back after failing to find Taehyung when he ran out that night. There was nothing except a photo on the floor. In the photo, we were smiling together in the sea in the background. It had only been a few hours earlier, but it seemed like such a long time ago. Had we worked so hard and for so long for no reason? Were we destined to fall apart like this? I passed the gas station without stopping. We'd meet again someday. We'd laugh together someday as we did in the photo. I'd gather enough courage to face myself someday, but today was not that time. Damp wind blew just like that day. At the moment, my phone rang as if sending me a warning. The phone sent reverberations to the photo hung on the rearview mirror. Hosuk's name appeared on the screen. Jin. Jungkook got into an accident. Jungkook, 13th of June, which is roughly same day. Okay. I heard faint voices and opened my eyes to find Hosuk and Jimin gazing at me. Every time I blinked, their faces kept disappearing and appearing again. Are you hurt? Are you in pain? Jimin asked. I'm fine, I'm not hurt. It was a lie. It was a serious accident and I almost died. The doctors kept warning the others for days that they should be prepared for the worst case scenario. I regained consciousness after 10 days and began to recuperate at an astonishing rate. You should have called us. What are we to you? Hosuk sounded mad. Hosuk, it's not that I began to talk but couldn't finish the sentence. As soon as I came to myself at the hospital, I thought of them. If I would have been able to think straight, I would have called them first, but my mind was blank and I was in pain. The sedative they gave me was so strong that reality, dreams, memories, and illusions all seemed to be knotted up in my head and were impossible to disentangle. The unbearable pain finally subsided, but the strange images that flashed before my eyes while suffering from fever and insomnia kept coming back. I wasn't sure whether the scenes had actually happened or they were just twisted nightmares triggered by severe pain. I couldn't trust my memory, but I still couldn't contact them. I didn't know what to say or even how to start talking. I just smiled at them, or I tried to smile at them. My face looked like it was all twisted up and I was about to cry. J-Hope's entry, same day, right? Same day. I walked out of the room because I felt tears welling up. Jungkook saying he was fine and was heart-wrenching. I had just heard of Jungkook's accident that afternoon. The burger joint was packed with pedestrians taking shelter from the rain. Some of them were Jungkook's classmates. How come Jungkook doesn't show up anymore? I didn't ask this question for any particular reason. I'd lost contact with all the others after returning from the sea, including Jungkook. Then an unexpected answer came my way. Oh, he was in an accident, so he's been absent. An accident? Is he hurt badly? We don't know. He hasn't been to school for 20 days? Called him immediately, but Jungkook didn't answer. I was about to call again, but decided to open our group chat instead. No new messages over the past 20 days. The last message was from when we were at the sea. Was it then? That night when we all parted and went back home? Was it that night? I left a message that Jungkook was badly hurt, and that whatever everyone was up to, it was ridiculous not to know what had happened to him for over 20 days. The number next to my message didn't budge, meaning none of the others opened the chat to read my message. Did our days together mean nothing? Were we fair weather friends? I got mad at myself. Mad for not contacting him earlier. Mad for letting him return home alone. Jungkook was not a child, but he was the youngest. He was still just a student. I strolled up and down the hallway a few times and stopped in front of his room. Through the cracked door, I recognized Jungkook's face. He clearly wasn't fine. He looked as pale as a sheet. Suddenly, the image of Jungkook coming through the door of our empty hideout came into my mind. He was just in his 3rd year of middle school. His naive face showed a sense of loss, as if he'd realized something had come to an end. Did our existence remind him of that sense of loss? 4 of the others hadn't checked my message, the group chat, yet. I posted another message. This is disappointing. You? Dancing? When I stepped into the room, Jimin and Jungkook were talking about a dance crew. Jimin said it had only been about 2 weeks since he joined the crew and turned his head bashfully. That's right, you were a good dancer. We should all go and see you dance. Taehyung's call came through at the moment. What have you been doing? Why didn't you check my message earlier? I tried to sound angrier than I actually was. Taehyung stuttered in a croaky voice, as if he'd been crying. Taehyung, same day. How's Jungkook? That's all I could say. I wrapped up my shift at the convenience store and stepped onto the street to find puddles here and there. It had rained a few hours ago. I'd noticed the rain when I turned my head to look out the glass door. One of the customers brought an umbrella. My face was reflected back to me in the puddle. My eyes filled with tears and my throat was choked. Hoseok said he was with Jungkook and Jungkook looked better than he thought. I dropped down. I'm okay. Hoseok must have handed his phone over to Jungkook. He seemed to be pretending that he was okay. How about you? Worry about yourself. My reply was curt without meaning to be. Jungkook laughed bashfully. I'm going over there right now. I couldn't keep my word. I got to the hospital in no time, ran up the stairs because I couldn't wait for the elevator, and darted down the hallway. I was just about to jump into Jungkook's room, but I froze there. I could hear voices through the cracked door. It was Namjoon. Seokjin was there. I stepped back without realizing it. I'm always the same, Namjoon said. Indeed, he was. He was just going on with his life. I dropped down on a bench in the hallway. People in patient uniforms walked by, and some were in tears. If someone asked, I must have answered the same, that I was always the same. That was the truth. I just went back and forth between my house and the convenience store. Dad was still drinking and making trouble from time to time. The indoor light was still dim, and the drain got clogged frequently. There was one change. The nightmare had stopped. The nightmare of Yoongi dying, Jungkook falling, and Hoseok in a frenzy of despair. Come to think of it, the nightmare must have stopped after the night we fought at the beach. It was replaced by another dream. Tears ran down Jin's face. Blue flower petals rolled on the asphalt street at night. We were trampled down, and were tinted with someone's blood. I bent my steps. The elevator was coming up from the 2nd basement floor. I looked back at the patient room. I wasn't ready to meet Jin and Namjoon yet. June's entry for the same night. I arrived at Jungkook's hospital room in the middle of the night. Jungkook seemed okay. He laughed a lot, talked a lot. I did too. Talked about the gas station, the weather, whatever else, so we didn't have to talk about what was really important. Jungkook should have asked, but he didn't. He didn't ask why the others fought that night, why we left, and why we didn't come back. I was no different. Didn't tell him why I left our lodging without saying anything, and didn't ask Jin what problems he had with Taehyung. We just swallowed the questions that we should have blurted out. On our way back, Jin asked me if I was okay. Do you know you haven't said a word? I told him I know, and I was sorry. I told him I was fine. We parted near the gas station. I looked around the night street just before I went into the gas station. It was desolate. The red "Do Not Walk" signal turned to the green "Walk" signal at the crosswalk. crossed the street and walked along the railroad, fourth container from the end. We had had a campfire there before we left for the sea. This was just the first time I came here since that day. Dust rose when I opened the container door. I stood there for a while until my eyes got used to the darkness. From what I had heard from Jungkook, the others didn't keep in touch with each other. No one updated me about Taehyung, but nothing much would have changed. This container was the only place where Taehyung could have taken shelter from his dad. I knew it, but it didn't drop by. It was exhausting enough to go back and forth between the library and gas station. It was the truth and an excuse at the same time. Deep down inside, I might have been avoiding Taehyung. Couldn't afford to confront Taehyung. It was too emotionally exhausting. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see different corners of the container. They were filled with memories of us sharing our lives together. I told Jin that I was okay. Really, I wasn't. Jungkook, who got into an accident, couldn't be okay. It couldn't be okay to just drown what happened the other night all at once. If Taehyung and Jin hadn't got into a fight that night, if I'd stayed with the others, if anyone had been with Jungkook, then there wouldn't have been an accident. But I said I was okay. I casually chatted with him as if none of it was my fault and tapped him on his shoulder, telling him to recover quickly. I said it like it was a word of blessing or advice or consolation. I hadn't changed a bit. I was always hesitant before asking questions and making choices at a fork in the road. Ooh, okay. Interesting. Okay. HYYH. I woke up from a weird dream. This is the 15th of June, so this is the first entry that's not on the 13th, so this is HYYH's entry. I woke up from a weird dream. I thought I heard someone knock on the door, but I couldn't hear anything after getting up. I must have heard it in my dream. What time is it? I picked up my phone, but the battery was dead. I connected my phone to the charger and got out of bed. My head ached, my shoulders felt stiff. The piece I'd worked on until dawn was replaying again and again. I'd been staying up all night for several days, but I couldn't find the key to unravel the tangled notes. Maybe it was because of that piece replaying over and over again, but in my dream, I was roaming around in the fog, following a faint whistling sound. After a long time, I arrived at a garden of an apartment complex. There I found a piano key lying among the thick bushes. The half-burned piano key was covered with soil and rotten leaves. I walked into the garden and reached out for the key. Just as I'd almost grasped it, the apartment complex, the fog, and the whistling sound all disappeared at once. The next minute, I was standing in the middle of this workroom. In the distance, I was sitting in front of a piano with Jungkook. Jungkook said something, and I laughed. When was this? I couldn't recall the exact date. The scene was imprinted on my memory as a clear day. There were many days I could clearly see the scene. All of a sudden, it became dark outside, and I was wandering through the night street. I was on my way back from the beach. I put my hands into my pockets as I talked about my work to Hoseok, and I felt the piano key with my fingertips. The dream continued on in this disjointed manner. Moments overlapped with one another, and fragments of memories piled up in a mess. I heard a banging sound at the entrance just as I turned off the music. Who could that be? I opened the door, but no one was there. I drank a cup of water and lay down on the sofa. The past few weeks had been hectic merry-go-round. Everything just couldn't go smooth when composing music. It was so hard to concentrate at first, and I was also not used to working with a partner. The woman was straightforward and outspoken. She popped in and out of my workroom whenever she felt like it. She never hesitated or beat around the bush when she evaluated my work. She took away my lighter when I tried to smoke and threw me a lollipop instead. She nagged me to sleep and eat. I couldn't argue with her because her performance and pieces were impressive, because her evaluation was accurate. That provoked me. I began to spend more and more time in my workroom. I lost my sense of time and became addicted to my work. I would stay up all night. Once I got down to work, I didn't answer any calls or check my messages. All my nerves were on edge, and I didn't want to talk with anyone. I I switched off the alerts to every chat app. Would I have turned out as skilled and talented as the woman if I hadn't wasted my time and had continued training in music? I wondered. I didn't want to fall behind her. This is really nice. That was what that woman said after listening to the unfinished piece yesterday evening. It was an upgraded version of what I'd previously written. This is really nice. It felt as if I'd heard that exact same words before. I was trying to call up the memory when she got her guitar out, and she began to harmonize and play variations of the melody. I sat in front of the piano and played along. Don't forget, we're meeting at the hospital tomorrow morning. The woman packed her guitar and stood up. About 2 hours later, I looked up at her with a blank face, and she rolled her eyes. Then I remembered she'd been giving free solo performances at hospitals and schools. She told me last week to tag along to the next performance. I hadn't answered, but she finalized the plan on her own. She said she'd call early in the morning, and I should make sure to pick up the phone. After she left, I sat in front of the piano again. It wasn't bad, but it felt as if something substantial was missing. I distinctly remembered that I'd almost grasped what it was the last time I worked on this piece. I made changes, but nothing clicked. I stood up from the piano bench, feeling pressure on my chest. Maybe I was putting too much emphasis on that something because it didn't come to me. Maybe it'd be better to fine-tune the piece a bit more and stop waiting for that something. I looked out the window. The sun was coming up. My phone vibrated as it powered up again. She hadn't called yet. I laid down on the sofa. My phone rang after a few minutes. The name Jimin appeared on the screen. That instantly reminded me of a scene from my dream last night. A house was aflame. Someone asked me, "Is there anyone inside?" I answered, "No, there's no one inside." The scene shifted, and I was sitting in Mom's unlit room. Mom was saying, "If I hadn't had you, if you hadn't been born." I don't know how I got from my workroom to the hospital. I was running up the stairs like crazy when I snapped out of it. The hallway was strangely long and dark. People in patient uniforms slid by. My heart kept throbbing. Their faces were pale like sheets, and expressionless. They seemed dead. I could hear my heavy breathing in my head. I could see Jungkook in his patient uniform laying on the bed through the cracked door. He must be asleep, but he seemed as if he were dead. He almost died, the doctor said. It was a miracle he was alive. It was that night when we came back from the beach. Jimin's voice still ringing in my ears. I turned my head. Couldn't look at him anymore. A multitude of images flashed before my eyes like a panorama. Flame that made a crackling sound in a drum at a construction site. Mom's room that had always been unlit. Sounds of the piano that came from the fire. Jungkook's back as he clumsily played the piano at the music shop. Jungkook laying unconscious on the empty street. And the pain and fear he must have gone through as he lost consciousness. She said, "It's all because of you." She said, "If you hadn't been born." Mom's voice. Or was it mine? Or was it someone else's? I'd been tormented my whole life because of those words. I wanted to believe that they weren't true. But Jungkook was lying there. He was lying in a hospital where patients roamed around like a living dead. If I'd just ignored him and left the music shop, if I'd just died in the flames, would none of this have happened? At that moment, the melodies of the woman's guitar penetrated my mind. Guitar sound overlapped my crackling sound of blazing fire, sound of the piano, countless other sounds. I covered my head and ears with both arms, but the sound of the guitar only grew louder. I turned and began to escape down the hallway. I bumped into passersby, but I didn't have time to turn around and apologize. They shouted curses at me. I didn't look back. I had to run away from the voice and the hallucination. My head ached. I'd lost all my confidence. I ran down the hallway, faltering and staggering, and got out of the hospital. So apparently being in the hospital made Yoon-yi freak out. Same entry, different perspective. A noise from outside the room roused me from sleep. I was having a strange dream, but couldn't quite remember the details. The night of the traffic accident replayed like a blurry CCTV screen in a black and white. I could feel my heartbeat slow down and then quicken explosively. All of a sudden, pain surged, and someone was whispering faintly. The next minute, I woke up writhing. My entire body was soaked with sweat. Sunlight came through the window and right onto my face. I stepped into the hallway and was met by the usual. It was my first time to use the crutches. I still needed to get used to them, but they were much easier than a wheelchair. I went outside through the entrance. It was breezy. My sweat cooled quickly and it felt chilly on the back of my neck. It wasn't as warm as I thought it inside the patient room. As I sat on a bench and opened my sketchbook, the doctor in charge came over to me. He said it was a miracle that I had recovered. He hadn't thought it'd be possible. He tapped me on the shoulder, saying that I was the living proof of a miracle. You should be good for the rest of your life. I turned my head and saw a girl standing there who I'd met yesterday in the hallway. The girl said it was so amazing to find a miracle right next to her and asked me how I felt. I responded that I was just really healthy. I lowered my eyes again to the sketchbook. Before I knew it, I was drawing what I'd seen in my dream. My memories were blurred like a CCTV screen. It was hard to concentrate on my drawing or the memories because the girl kept asking me questions. After a while, I looked up. A familiar song was playing. Someone was giving a performance in the distance. I definitely knew this song. HYYH sometimes played this in his workroom. I went over to the stage on my crutches. A lighter marked HYYH was hanging on the guitar. We know where that's from. We know where that's from. Okay. Where are we at? Okay. Jimin's entry on the 3rd of July, year 22. Hoseok had been in a bad mood since he visited Jungkook. If anyone could truly tie the 7 of us together as we, Hoseok could. He embraced and protected us like a shelter. But he wasn't always as bright and cheerful on the inside as he tried to appear in front of us. It was closer to a sense of responsibility. He instinctively sensed the wounds and pain of those around him and couldn't bear them well. This was why he pretended to be livelier than he actually was by nature. Even today, Hoseok just sat in one corner of the practice room for a long time and left without saying a word. I joined Just Dance and began to learn how to dance right after I returned from the sea. Hoseok gave me the opportunity. I'm awkward at meeting new people as I spent too much time in the hospital. He brought a new dance partner too. She was a friend he'd met at the orphanage. She was the only person who could make him laugh when he was in that mood. When she murmured something while looking at his phone together, he chuckled. You laughed. She made fun of him. Hoseok turned his head away, telling her to stop it. He chuckled again. The practice room became silent in a flash after I turned off the music. I just lay there on the floor. I liked dancing when I was little. I danced a lot and often was praised for it. But the patient room wasn't a good place for dancing. When I attended school in between hospital stays, I just sank my head on my chest to avoid the eyes of my classmates. After a while, my body felt so stiff. I couldn't perform the motions that Hoseok did so easily. There was nothing to do but keep practicing even after everyone else had left. I replayed the video of the dance moves I had learned earlier on my phone. Hoseok's moves were fluid but accurate in the video. I knew that they were a product of years of practice and that it would take a long time for a novice like me to reach that level. It was wishful thinking. I could only keep sighing out loud. I went to my parents' house the day I left the beach. I think it's funny, I went to my parents' house the day I left the beach alone. As I looked up at the brightly lit windows, I couldn't help but think, had this place ever been our house? I pressed the bell at the front gate. It took a while for it to open. I took the elevator and got off on the 17th floor. Although the door was open, no one came out to greet me. My parents were sitting on the sofa in the living room, watching a black and white movie on TV. I don't want to go back to the hospital. blurted out after some hesitation. "Don't worry, I won't do anything rash, but I'm not going back there." "Where have you been?" Mom asked. "With my friends." "Friends? Wash up and go to bed. We'll take some time, think about it, what to do with you," Dad cut in. I bowed and went to my room down the hallway. As soon as the door closed behind me, I collapsed. "We'll take some time to think about what to do with you." Dad's voice rang in my head. I tried to brace myself, but it wasn't easy. I barely slept that night. Instead, I made 2 resolutions. I'll discover what I'd like to commit myself to, and I'll prove that I'm good at it. I picked myself up, stood in front of the mirror. I could imitate the turns pretty well, but my feet kept getting twisted up. I kept making mistakes. I was supposed to do steps with my new dancing partner the next day, and I wanted to impress her. I wanted to be recognized as an equal instead of hearing, "Not bad." Jimin, July 4th, year 22. When I came back to myself, I was rubbing at my arm so hard that my skin peeled off. My hands trembled and I could hear the sound of my heavy breathing. A thin stream of blood ran down my arm, but by the reflection in the mirror, I could see that my eyes were bloodshot. Fragments of what just happened raced through my head. I'd lost concentration while dancing with my partner. My steps got tangled. I crashed into her, fell down, and skinned my arm. The blood reminded me of a grass flower arboretum. I felt suffocated. I couldn't remember how I got up, ran out of the practice room, and made it to the restroom. I scrubbed and washed and scraped like crazy, becoming more and more frightened at seeing blood getting sucked down the drain. I thought I'd overcome this. I thought I was okay. But I wasn't. I had to flee. I had to wash it off. I had to look the other way. Then I suddenly realized that my partner also fell. I quickly rushed back to the practice room, but there was no one there. Her overcoat and HYYH's bag were scattered on the floor. I ran outside. It was raining hard. I could see HYYH with my dancing partner on his back, running with all his might in the far distance. She seemed to be unconscious. Her limp arms swayed in every direction. I chased after him with an umbrella in my hand, but came to a stop. I tried to recall the moment she fell, but couldn't. When I saw the blood, everything around me vanished. I wouldn't be of any help even if I caught up with him. I had hurt her by pushing her to the ground, but didn't even stop to see if she was okay, because I was shaking like jelly at my own blood. I turned around. Every time I took a step, rain splattered on my sneakers. The headlights of cars swished by me. It had rained on that picnic day a long time ago, just like today. On that day, I'd run away from the glass flower arboretum. My body was covered with mud that looked like blood. I hadn't grown up one bit from that little 8-year-old kid. J-Hope's entry, the 7th of July, year 22. My ankle didn't heal well. I had a small accident a few days ago. Now I could say that it was small, but it was serious at the time. Jimin and that girl ran into each other while practicing a dance move, and they both fell hard. I carried the girl on my back and ran to the hospital, but it wasn't far, but it was raining and she was unconscious. While she got treated, I paced up and down the hallway. It was late at night, but the hallway in front of the emergency room was full of people drinking coffee from the vending machine or looking at their phones. Rain and sweat dripped from my hair. I shook my hair with one hand, sitting down on a bench in one corner, and dropped her bag by mistake. Coins rolled around on the floor, and ballpoint pens and a handkerchief were scattered all over. There was also a plane ticket. I knew she had applied for an audition from an international dance team. The ticket must have meant that she won the spot. At that moment, the doctor pulled me up. I put the ticket back in her bag and walked towards the doctor. He said that the girl had hit her head and had a concussion, and that I didn't need to worry too much. It was still raining outside. I stood by the entrance with her. Osuk, the girl called me. She seemed as if she had something to say. "Wait here, I'll go buy an umbrella." I ran out into the pouring rain. A convenience store came into view. I didn't want to hear what she was going to say. I wasn't sure if I could congratulate her. Jimin was anxiously waiting for me back in the practice room. I told him that the girl was okay, but Jimin looked dejected and bent his head low. The next morning, my ankle was swollen. Tripped slightly the night before while carrying her on my back. It was raining, and I was running. I didn't even fall. My foot slipped just a little bit. I put on pain relief patch and tried to walk more carefully. I thought it'd be okay. It didn't swell up that much at first, but it got worse and worse. I had to stay on my feet all day at the burger joint, and I couldn't skip dance practice. Interesting. Okay. Taehyung, 10th of July, year 22. So it's 3 days later. Taehyung's writing. I darted down the sloping roads through narrow back alleys. I lived in this neighborhood for about 20 years. I knew every nook and cranny. Every corner brought back stories and memories, but this wasn't time for reminiscing. Police were chasing me. I couldn't afford to get lost in memories, but as I turned one corner after another, as I jumped one fence after another, I felt as if time was winding backwards. I spray painted graffiti at the bus stop for the first time in a long time. Picked up spray cans again because of one girl. I ran into her while she was trying to steal food from a convenience store a few days ago. She couldn't bring herself to look down at her empty hands. She was obviously scared of her empty hands. I didn't want to admit that I knew exactly how she felt. You have to look squarely into your own empty hands. No one can do it for you. But I couldn't turn my head away from her. I recognized the look on her face. The look when you feel like you don't belong anywhere in the world. When you're afraid, you are responsible for everything that went wrong in your life. When you are lonely and don't know where to go, stay. I saw that girl from time to time after that day. Didn't do anything special together. We just sat on the street or walked along the railroad. Then we did some graffiti together. She seemed to feel awkward holding a spray can for the first time, but did her best to follow what I did. Finally, we came to the bus stop. Namjoon got off at this bus stop. Police also frequently showed up here. I once got caught spraying graffiti here. The girl tried to read my face as I stood still with a spray can in my hand. I hadn't been in touch with June since I saw him at the hospital, but I did pass by his container by the railroad one night several days ago. I was out in the street to get away from Dad and his drunken temper. I just blindly ran out, wandered around aimlessly, saw the light on at the container. Someone was in there. It must have been Namjoon. I wanted to go in, but I couldn't. I got closer and could hear a faint melody and snoring sound. I sat on the ground in front of the container and looked up at the sky. It was literally pitch black without any hint of stars. Police were gaining on me fast. I was hiding in an alley with a dead end. There was no way out. It was meant to be. Even if I stopped reminiscing and concentrated on getting away, I'd get caught anyway. It was the expected outcome. No problem could be solved with empty fists. I walked out of the alley and put both of my arms up. I surrendered. June, 3 days later. Packed my bag and got out of the library. It had been over a month since I started working night shifts at the gas station, and I went to the library during the day. I was beat after coming home for working all night, but I didn't just sit around after the alarm went off. It's not that I'd accomplished anything over the past month. I just stared out the window or skimmed through magazines in a daze. It wasn't like I wasn't feeling impatient. I knew I had to go at my own pace, but it wasn't as easy as I thought. What were all these people doing here at the library? Would I be able to catch up with them? But I didn't know where to start or what to hold on to. I leaned my head against the window of the bus, from the library to the gas station, every day. The tediously familiar landscape slid by outside the window. Would I ever be able to escape from this routine? It seemed impossible for me to even wish for a better tomorrow. A woman sitting in front of the bus came into view. Her shoulders heaved as if she were sighing. She was the woman who handed out flyers on a pedestrian overpass. I also recognized her from the library. We studied at the same library and gone home on the same bus for the past month. I'd never struck up a conversation with her, but we watched the same landscape, went through the same experiences, and sighed in the same way. I saw how she dozed off in one corner of the library and how her nose bled in front of the coffee vending machine. I wasn't looking for her. She caught my eye from time to time. I still had the hairband in my pocket, which I which I bought from a street vendor without thinking after I saw her hair tied with a yellow rubber band. The bus was approaching her stop. Someone pushed the stop button, and several passengers stood up, but the woman didn't. She must have fallen asleep. Should I wake her up? I hesitated for a moment. The bus finally came to a stop, but she showed no sign of moving. Passengers got off, the door slid closed, and the bus drove on. The bus reached my stop, and the woman still hadn't woke up. I hesitated once again as I got out through the back door. No one would pay attention to her. She'd missed her stop already and wouldn't wake up until a few more stops passed. That'd probably add even more fatigue to her life. The bus departed as soon as I got off. Didn't look back. I placed the hairband on a woman's bag, and that was it. Several days ago, I'd been here and seen some graffiti painted on the wall in front of the bus stop. I'd automatically looked around, but Taehyung had been nowhere in sight. I'd assumed he'd left in a hurry because the spray cans were rolling around on the ground. I stared at the graffiti painted all over the wall for a while. Alright, Jin's entry on the 14th of July. I sat on a bench at a tent bar next to Namjoon. It was after midnight, but the tent bar was filled with guests who had come to close their days with bitter drinks. The call came in the afternoon. Namjoon had asked me to meet him after his shift at the gas station, and he hadn't said anything so far. He just continued to drain glass after glass. I asked him if anything was wrong, and he just smiled and shook his head. It's just that my life hasn't changed a bit since I was born. It doesn't get better or worse. Namjoon said that his energy had run dry, that he'd pretended to be a friend when he couldn't do anything for us. That was why he couldn't meet Taehyung or visit Jungkook again, that he was making excuses even at this moment and he was nothing. Our high school years came to mind after we had quite a few drinks. That incident Taehyung disclosed on the beach. Why did Namjoon defend me then? Why did you do it then? Instead of answering my question, Namjoon just asked another. Why did I do what I did then? Mom's death? My childhood at my maternal grandmother's in LA? Dad's cold expression when I came back to Korea? I never felt the warmth of family. Maybe I was feeling tipsy, or it was the night air, but I confided all my secrets that I'd never revealed before. Now I know everything about you, but aren't the others also waiting for you to share your story? Waiting for you to give them a clue about what happened then? Namjoon said after listening to my confession. I told him goodbye and headed home. I strolled along the street for some time, staggering a bit. The night breeze was refreshing, and the moon in the sky was bright. I stopped in front of some graffiti painted on a bus stop. If I confessed everything, would Namjoon believe me? If someone confessed to me that what I was going to say, would I be able to believe that person? A few days ago, I drove past the convenience store where Taehyung was working. Through the car window, I could see him smiling. He was talking to a customer and laughing out loud. That family laughter that made his mouth turn into a square shape. What is there to talk and laugh so loudly about with the customer? Well, Taehyung had always been like that. He shook with laughter at jokes no one found funny and shed tears at things no one found sad. How should I reconcile with Taehyung? The future appeared bleak. What does he mean by no one will believe him? That's what I don't get. Hosuck. July 16th, year 22. I turned the pages of a sketchbook one by one. We were smiling together in a classroom turned storage room. In the tunnel, and against the backdrop of the sea, Jungkook was lying alone on asphalt road. Blood was streaming down the road. The large moon hung high in the night. Are you hurt? I looked back and saw Jungkook coming into his patient room. I had danced with my ankle wrapped in a pressure bandage, and now a plaster cast was around that ankle. I seemed to be in better shape than you. I deliberately showed a dramatic reaction to his words and said that his health was unbeatable. Jungkook said he'd undergo a thorough checkup the next week and be able to go home after that if there were no problems. I decided that we should throw him a party. We'd had a party at Namjoon's container on the day Jimin escaped from the hospital. Hamburgers and cola and cake that Seokjin bought. We fought over who got to wear the only party hat until it was crushed. We smeared that expensive cake all over each other's faces. Namjoon complained that he'd have to clean up the mess all by himself, but it was fun. The 7 of us finally got together for the first time after we left high school. We laughed at every word and every movement. Every minute together was exhilarating and exciting, even though we didn't say or do much. I had wanted to make a day like this, a day we met and laughed together again. Hey, that night, Jungkook started to say as we got off the elevator and headed for the front door of the hospital. His gaze was fixed on something outside. He didn't seem to actually be looking at anything. He was just blinking his eyes as if trying to dig up an old memory. Does Jin talk about that night? Has he said that he saw me, or? Jungkook stopped talking. Jin? Saw you? Where? I asked, but he didn't open his mouth again. You're a good person, right? Jungkook asked me before we parted. Stop talking nonsense. I tapped him on his shoulder playfully and waved goodbye. I quickly bent my steps. Am I a good person? Growing up, I had been told that I was a bright and cheerful kid. I used to be told that I was sensitive and impressionable. Did that mean I was a good person? I'd never given it thought before. I looked back and saw him still standing at the entrance and looking up at the cloudy sky. Jin's entry, July 24th, year 22. It's about a week later. I followed Dad into the brightly lit conference room. I sat on a chair by the entrance and looked around. I wasn't sure why I had been summoned there. Dad sat in the center and was surrounded by familiar faces. I looked at the clock. The discharge party for Jungkook must have started. I was thinking of calling the others when Dad opened his mouth and the entire room became still. The atmosphere was heavy, but it didn't feel ominous. Rather, the room was buzzing with excitement and expectations. The lights went out, and the title of the conference appeared on the screen. Master Plan for the Redevelopment of Downtown Songju. Dad had called me all of a sudden. To be exact, it was his secretary who called me. I'd said I'd had an appointment, but I didn't think it would work. Dad asked me in the car, on our way, if I was still hanging out with those so-called friends of mine. I didn't answer. He wasn't asking a question, he was just belittling them, reproaching me for getting along with them, and ordering me to cut ties with them. He didn't even look at me. Don't waste your time on nothing. I'm telling you this out of experience. Besides, you'll have to help out with a lot here. Try to learn as much as you can, then you'll soon grow into an adult with your salt. Man, how's he gonna be like that? July 24th, Jimin's entry, same day. The inside of the container was completely decorated. The hamburgers, fries, drinks Hoseok brought were set on the table. Christmassy ornaments were dangling on the walls. Jungkook was sitting in the center. Only 3 of the 7 cups were filled. Hoseok had left for his part-time shift after laying out the food, and Namjoon was coming late after his part-time shift was over. No one could get a hold of Yoongi, and Jin said he'd come but hadn't shown up yet. The young sat speechless. Is he still uncomfortable in Namjoon's container? I'd almost dragged him here, but it was impossible to liven up the mood. This is how we were most of the time after returning from the sea. No one reached out to the others first, and no one was aware of how the others were doing. Maybe it was inevitable. We were no longer those students who ditched school to hang out together. We all had our own set of problems and obligations now. We couldn't afford to disregard them just because we wanted to be together. As for me, I had to work hard to stay out of the hospital and decide whether I'd go back to school. I had to prove to my parents as well as myself that I was okay. I had to make sure that I wasn't a burden for anyone. After some time, Jungkook hesitantly stood up. I held on to him, saying he could stay a little bit longer and see Namjoon. Jungkook just laughed, said he'd take a rain check. I couldn't keep him there. We cleared the table and left the container. We turned on our phones, flashlight function. It was 10:30. We parted in front of the container. As I crossed the railroad and waited for the bus to come, I could see Jungkook and Taehyung walk away in the distance with their flashlights on. That's nuts. okay? Same day, Taehyung's entry. I darted up the stairs, taking 3 and 4 at a time. Liquor bottles were rolling around here and there, and cups and plates were scattered across the floor. Dad had fallen to the ground in one corner with his head bowed. My sister said it was not what I thought even before I opened my mouth. Dad's voice was a bit loud and someone must have called the police thinking he was beating us. Then the police officers came into view. Women from the neighborhood who were gathered in front of our door clicked their tongues and walked away. My sister kept apologizing and bowing to the police officers. Nothing was broken and no one got hurt. I didn't need to be ashamed of this situation. Dad's drinking habit had long been the gossip of the neighborhood, but I looked the other way. Dad seemed to have fallen asleep. His face was sunburned and covered with a bushy beard, as he was working as a day laborer at the construction site. He had more gray hair than before. I could see the watery inside of his mouth and his tongue. I used to kill Dad in my dreams. Once I almost stabbed him in reality. Maybe it started from that point. I began to sympathize with him. I hated myself for sympathizing with him. Could that person be called a parent? He was not qualified to be one. Someone tapped me on my shoulder and I looked back to find a familiar face. He was a police officer who'd been dispatched to my house a few times. I'd also seen him at the police station several times when I was called in for my graffiti. I just bent my head low. It was a gesture to say I'm sorry for making them rush here for nothing, but I was also uncertain what look to wear on my face. Your neighbors must be worried about you two a lot. The lady who reported his incident didn't sound annoyed at all and asked us repeatedly to come quickly before someone got hurt. Make sure to find her and thank her later. I asked him if that lady's voice was low and husky. He couldn't recall exactly, but it could have been. My sister, who was talking with another police officer, turned her head to look at me. Do you keep in touch with Mom? I asked her after everybody left. She was cleaning up the bottles and plates scattered on the floor, and I was sitting against the wall. Dad was still asleep in the uncomfortable position. The sun had already set, and the long window above Dad's head was pitch dark. My sister picked herself up and sat at the dining table. She didn't say a word, and her silence more than answered my question. I asked her for Mom's address and telephone number. I didn't know her number, I just know that she lives in a rented apartment in Bakgu, Munhyun. I hope I said that right. Taehyung, why do you want to contact her? She asked, to ask her what she'd been thinking, why she left, why she appeared again. My sister sat down next to me. Taehyung, Mom misses you. I snorted and stood up. She was clearly unaware of how mad I was. I told her I was going to ask Mom these questions, but I wasn't particularly curious about her answers. How would it help me even if I knew why she left? I just wanted to release my smoldering resentment. Why did she come here? She's the one who abandoned us, and now she wants to play the mom figure. I started walking north, towards the direction of Munhyun. I wanted to walk faster than my throbbing heart. That was the only way for me to be able to breathe. It was already past the midnight. Buses had stopped running and I had no money for a taxi. Walking was my only option. In order to get there, I had to cross the railroad and a bridge and pass through downtown. I might be able to get there before sunrise? I sensed someone's footsteps behind when I was crossing the railroad. Jung-uk was following me. I'd completely forgotten that Jung-uk was with me when I ran into my house at the sight of the patrol car out front. Go away, I shouted at Jung-uk and walked on without looking back. He must have seen it all, the police, the neighbors clicking their tongues, liquor bottles rolling around, Dad snoring, and my sister with her head bent low. Jung-uk must have seen it all. I never told anyone about Dad's violence, never. I'd never told the others that Mom ran away. It wasn't because of my pride. Maybe it was. Just didn't seem fair that I should have to explain my miserable situation in life by myself. I quickened my pace. I finally got out of the residential area and climbed up the stairs, over pedestrian overpass, over the railroad when I heard footsteps behind me. I took a glance and saw Jung-uk. I was going to scream why he was still following me, but changed my mind. It was none of my business. I stepped onto the bridge after coming down from the railroad. Jungkook was still following me from far behind. I stopped in the middle of the bridge and looked down at the river. In the dead of night, roads and buildings were dimly illuminated by street lamps, but not the river. The jet-black river ran ferociously under my feet with a roaring sound. It felt more threatening because it was discernible in the dark. Jungkook also stopped behind me and looked down at the river. There were only two of us on the bridge. No pedestrians and no cars. Our t-shirts were wet with perspiration and flapped in the wind. Do you know, we've been walking for the past hour. I waved at Jungkook. He came closer. We began to walk side by side. Can I ask where we're going? I told him I was going to my mom's. I had something to tell her. Jungkook nodded. My pace was getting close. It was getting slower. I suddenly wondered if I was really going to my mom's. I didn't exactly know where she was living. I didn't know her number or address. I had no plan after arriving at the apartment complex. My rage had subsided in just an hour and was replaced with hunger and pain. I imagined what our encounter would be like. In fact, I had already imagined it countless times. It was the next step that was unclear. After asking Mom my questions, what would she say? Would she answer them all? Would she answer them at all? If so, or if not, how would I react? Maybe it was better for all of us if I didn't meet her. That was always my conclusion. But I kept imagining the moment and was now strolling the night street like this without any plan to see Mom. Is your leg okay? Come to think of it, Jungkook got his cast off, and I'd made him walk for hours. The doctor said I should walk a lot as rehabilitation. Jungkook showed me a smile and outpaced me as if he was trying to prove it. I couldn't bring myself to say that we should stop here. I decided to trudge on. Aren't you hungry? As I loosened up, all my senses came clamoring back. I'm regretting that I didn't finish off the cake and that hamburger. I giggled at Jungkook's words. Human beings are so absurdly strong or so absurdly weak, and we were the proof. Feeling starved, complaining that our legs hurt, and laughing together even in this situation. The lights grew brighter and more boisterous, and a busy street soon appeared in front of us. It was far into the night, but the brightly lit street was crowded and with people and cars passing by. It was 3:30 in the morning. We sat at an outdoor table outside a convenience store. Jungkook said he was thirsty as we were about halfway. Through our instant cup of noodles, I went into the store to buy drinks. When I came back, someone was standing in front of Jungkook. He had his back turned to me, so I couldn't tell who it was or what he was doing. Jungkook was looking up at him with an alarmed face. I ran to Jungkook's side and looked at the man. The man was wearing a dark khaki overcoat in the middle of summer. He had a dirty mop of bushy gray hair, and his scraggly beard was stained with ramen broth. He reeked of alcohol. He was greedily devouring my instant noodles. It'd be no use asking him who he was or why he was eating my noodles. I was surprised, but not angry. Actually, I was scared. At that moment, someone from a group of troublemakers coming out of the convenience store shoved the man's shoulder, and another tripped him. The man in the overcoat lost his balance and pushed the table as he fell down. Jungkook's instant noodle cup toppled over, and the broth spilled all over his legs. Jungkook sprang to his feet and hastily shook it off his pants. He said he was okay and wasn't burned, as the broth had cooled already. The group of troublemakers were walking away snickering. The man in the dirty khaki overcoat was staring at the toppled cup. His fingers were on the table and covered with noodles. I couldn't bring myself to ask if he was okay. Shouldn't you apologize? You just made this mess. I screamed at the men. They looked back. No, we didn't. He did. And no one told you to sit there. Little punks out at this hour, the men cursed inarticulately. The man in the dirty overcoat looked at me. Our eyes met in the air. He had yellowish eyes and a face covered with age spots. He reminded me of someone who was always on the drink, swinging at everything with his fists and living like a dictator and a loser. What I expected to happen happened. I flung myself at the men and 2 from the group threw punches at me. I dodged the first punch, but the second punch grazed my chin. Jungkook stepped in to stop me, but got caught up in the fight as well. The plastic tables and chairs were turned over, and the no parking sign got kicked down. The part-timer at the convenience store had already called the police, as if he were used to such rows. We could hear the siren a minute later. We all leapt to our feet and ran in opposite directions, shouting at each other that they were lucky to get away this time. I was particularly good at fleeing. I sometimes got caught on purpose, but now was not one of those times. I continued to lead the way, checking whether Jungkook was keeping up. A silvery car passed by us at full speed. Its side mirror brushed against Jungkook. Stunned, he sank down. He'd just been discharged from the hospital after 2 months because of a traffic accident. It was natural that he was stunned. The car came to a screeching stop, and one of the men who'd hit us earlier stuck his head out of the passenger seat window. "Watch it. We're letting you go this time. There'll be no next time." The car vanished with a roaring engine. Jungkook slowly picked himself up, holding onto my arm. He looked uncomfortable. He must have hurt his leg when he fell. The inside of my mouth throbbed. Blood smeared on the back of my hand when I wiped my mouth with it. "Where should we go?" Jungkook asked. "With his leg?" "Oh, with his leg? With this leg? We're going back." Jungkook began to walk, saying that he was okay. "Look, I'm fine." I stood there and watched Jungkook drag one leg from behind. "Let's go back," I shouted at Jungkook. I checked my phone. It was 4:30 in the morning. We still had some time to kill until the first bus came. I looked around and found a low hill below the entertainment district. "Have you seen the sunrise?" I propped up Jungkook as we walked up the hill. I sank down on the stairs at the end of the gentle slope. They say the sky is at its darkest right before the sunrise, and it was true. No stars were visible in the pitch dark sky, but neon signs of different shapes and colors radiating bright lights in the city down below. I turned my eyes northward. I roughly guessed the neighborhood that Mom must be living in. There, that must be it. She must be eating, sleeping, or cleaning in that apartment. "Jungkook," I followed Mom then. Jungkook stared at me. I fixed my eyes on the lights streaming out of the windows of the apartment complex. Then, that night 10 years ago, when Mom left home, that night when Mom, my sister, and I were beaten to a pulp by Dad, we cried ourselves to sleep. I couldn't recall why he beat us so hard, but I distinctly remember thinking, I'm supposed to go swimming with my friends tomorrow, and I guess Mom won't be able to pack a lunch for me. Will my busted lip heal by tomorrow? If not, they'll make fun of me. My shoulders hurt. I shouldn't have tried to turn to avoid his punches. My sister is weeping quietly. It was even more distressing to hear it today. Half asleep, I caught a glimpse of Mom standing at our feet and looking down at us. She was leaving. She was deserting us. I knew it instantly. I pretended to be asleep, got up, and followed her. I didn't have any plan. I wasn't thinking of living with her. I didn't feel bitter or scared. What did it be like to have no mother? What did it be like to live without one? It wasn't something you could just understand. I followed her for quite some time. In my memory, I walked all night, but my memory must be exaggerated as I was a little child then. She didn't look back. Not even once. Was she really unaware of me following her? Maybe she was struggling to look forward, for fear of having to take me with her if she looked back. Of course, that thought came to me afterwards, when I struggled to grasp an understanding of her. Now, I don't know why I came this far. Hey, I looked up at Jungkook's voice. I'm sorry. I gazed at him. What are you sorry for? Why are you sorry? You couldn't go see your mom because of me, Jungkook answered. Are you an idiot? I glared. I didn't mean to lose my temper, but my voice got louder on its own. My tongue continued to trip as I wasn't good at speaking and didn't know how to express my feelings. Why do you feel sorry? People should be sorry for you. What did you do wrong? I should be sorry for bringing you here. My parents, who made me bring you here, should be sorry. Those guys who picked the fight first should be sorry. I continued to raise my voice. You're a good person. You're as good as you can be. It's not your fault. I It's not your fault. The sky, which had seemed to remain pitch dark forever, began to turn bluish in a flash. The light that permeated the sky from the farthest end sucked in the glimmer of the neon signs. We watched the sunrise without a word. The huge red-hot sun purged up over the apartment complex. Was Mom watching the sunrise too? Two of us sat in the back of the bus next to each other on our way home. It was before dawn broke over us. The road was empty, and the bus continued to race along. I turned my head and looked towards the north once again. That night, Mom had stopped walking. She stood there motionless for some time. She didn't look back either. If I had continued forward at that point, I would have reached her. I could have held on to her hand and asked where she was going, where she was headed while leaving us behind, and when she was coming back. I could have cried, thrown a tantrum, and maybe pulled her back home. But I just turned around and returned home alone. My entire body ached, and I couldn't go swimming with the others. I lay on the floor sweating, trying to sleep. I didn't know why. "It's that man again," hearing Jungkook's voice. I looked out the window. A stooped over man in a khaki overcoat was walking alone.